Here's a guy that wants you to believe more lies that he's telling today. This guy isn't even in the administration. Representative Stutzman. Representative Stutzman is asked about this whole situation. Representative Stutzman probably should have stayed his ass at home because no one really knows who he is, but he's about to get a lot more famous for saying this stupid shit.
All of that, I want to get your response to the breaking news we've been following this hour that the House Oversight Committee has just released emails showing that Jeffrey Epstein mentioned Donald Trump by name multiple times in various private correspondence with Ghislaine Maxwell and the author Michael Wolff. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, good morning, Wolf. Great to be with you again. I think that we all know President Trump has been the most investigated person probably in the world over the last several years. And, of course, the information that was released this morning by the Democrats, for one, I would say, it shows up on the day that we're going to open up the government again in the House. We're voting this afternoon. But also, the Oversight Committee, led by the Republican chairman, James Comer, is always going to be looking at the facts and whatever the facts lead. And again, as I say, President Trump has been the most investigated president that we probably will ever have. And so the fact that this information comes out today, I think is a bit ironic, but at the same time, any information that's released has to be taken seriously, and I know that the Oversight Committee will do that.
Marlon Stutzman is in a bit of a pickle. Maybe he shouldn't have gone on TV. He should have canceled this interview at the last moment if he had just heard about this before he went on. He has to toe this line of, number one, did you notice his number one objective here is to protect Donald Trump? It's not to find out more about information about these victims, to find out more information about the release of these emails that can get us more information. His number one objective was to say that Donald Trump is probably the most investigated, what did he say, the most investigated person probably in the history of the world. Maybe Donald Trump deserves to be the most investigated person in the history of the world because maybe Donald Trump is probably one of the biggest criminals in the history of the world who's gotten away with many crimes that he's never actually had to face consequences for. Maybe the criminal in the White House needs to be investigated because he does so much criminal activity. It's weird how his first objective is to protect the criminal in the White House. And then when the question comes of whether or not we should do more about this, I mean, the information could be valid. I mean, we should look into it further. Are you willing to look in it further? Or are you going to be one of those people who continues to investigate the criminal in the White House too much, like you just said? What a loser this guy is. Here's more from this guy.
Alita Grijalva of Arizona, the Democrat, is sworn in later today, 2 months after her election, by the way. She's expected to be the 218th signature needed to force a vote to release all of the Epstein files. Do you think those files should be released?
Well, again, I think James Comer, the Oversight Committee chair, as well as the others who are responsible for these files, have done a very good job handling them methodically and making sure that the victims are protected, that Epstein, of course, was a monster that we know of, and the fact that these files are being released and information is coming out is good for all of us. I mean, we want transparency in our government, and I trust that James Comer, Congressman Jim Jordan, they are the ones that are truly handling this very well in the House of Representatives. Democrats are doing, their job, of course, as the opposition and making sure that information is out there. But again, I think that, it's interesting that they release those files today on the day that the government shutdown is going to end, and that it's a positive for Republicans that we're going to continue funding the government as we planned on, and that the government's going to be open. SNAP benefits are going to start being released back to the American people that we're truly counting on them over the past month. And because the Democrats weren't able to get those SNAP benefits, and of course a lot of other just problems that we didn't need to have and force on the American people, but that's what the Democrats chose.
You should have just gone home, Merlin. You shouldn't have stuck your face in front of the TV because it's a distraction from the reopening of the government. I'm going to get to that story in a second because you probably don't want to talk about the little provision that Senate Republicans slipped into this whole reopening of the government, because that's not good news for you either. Maybe Wolf Blitzer asked them this afterwards. So if you're suggesting that it's a curious coincidence that the timing of these emails that are valid being released on the day that the government is supposed to get voted on reopening, if you're suggesting that it's a curious timing, you would be saying that they're doing this and it's fraudulent, that it's not credible, that they're just trying to distract. Hey, this should be the headline. Merlin Stutzman thinks that the reopening of the government should be something, because it's happening today, to ignore child sex trafficking victims, to ignore the release of more information about all the people who participated in raping little children. Representative Stutzman thinks that the rape and coordinated trafficking of little girls is not that important. Representative Stutzman is a bad guy. And you know what's completely unsurprising? Remember those names, since we talked about Adelita Grijalva, that's supposed to get sworn in now?
Caroline, why are White House officials then meeting with Representative Boebert in an effort to try and get her to not sign this petition calling for the release of the files?
Doesn't it show transparency that members of the Trump administration are willing to brief members of Congress whenever they please? Doesn't that show our level of transparency? Doesn't that show the level of transparency when we are willing to sit down with members of Congress and address their concerns? That's a defining factor of transparency. Having discussions with members of Congress about various issues, and I'm not going to detail conversations that took place in the Situation Room, in the press briefing room.
I've been thinking it, and I didn't want to say it out loud. This whole shutdown process, they've been trying to get to some of the few Republicans that decided to do something right.
The least we can do is disclose information. These women have been fighting for justice for 30 years, and they still don't have any. And there are people here who don't want to give them that justice. Their stories are compelling. They're terrible. The thing that really hit me yesterday is when the third victim spoke, she relayed some of the same emotions I'm currently feeling. And it was too difficult for me to watch that. It was very painful. And I kept asking myself, in 30 years from now, am I going to be that girl at the table who didn't get justice?
And now, this is what Nancy Mace, who was hell-bent on being a part of releasing these files and getting all the bad guys, this is what she had to say in response to this. All capitals. I'm so sick of the fake news focusing on Trump and not Epstein victims. Everyone knows Trump kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, and Epstein victims have exonerated the president. Stop gaslighting and start telling the victims' stories. Makes me sick. Those who abused underage girls need to see jail time. Tell that story. Countdown to the point when Nancy Mace is going to say, I'm so disgusted with this whole process and how you guys keep going after Donald Trump. I'm no longer going to sign on to this discharge petition to release the Epstein files. That's where Nancy Mace is heading, because they picked up Adelita Grijalva. So they need to lose one on the Republican end. Guess it hasn't worked for getting Massey on their side. Hasn't worked for getting Marjorie Taylor Greene on their side, but they're probably working on her too. The Republican Party is in totality about protecting pedophiles. Nancy Mace and all of her crying and how she wants to go after victims. And then when one of those potential perpetrators of this horrific crime is exposed, suddenly she doesn't want to talk about it anymore. Hold your kids tight if you get near a Republican.